Are you the oldest? Or
I'm the second oldest, and my brother
oldest?
was raised by my grandmother in Texas, so I definitely, definitely was the one that, had to take care of my brothers.
Okay, so your oldest brother, the oldest one went with your grandmother.
Yeah.
And you stayed home with
And I
how
take
many?
my two other younger brothers.
Two younger brothers. Okay, so you were in charge.
I'm the only chick in the family, okay?
all right. So you were really in charge.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So then your mother worked 2 jobs. At what point did your father leave? How old were you?
Oh, I was like 8.
Okay.
I was like 8. And my father and my mother didn't have a friendly divorce. It was an ugly one. It was the first one that I ever remember in the community, because if you remember in those years, if you can remember some history, people didn't get divorced. They just didn't. But my parents did, and my father went to court, and because my mother worked around the clock, was able to win custody by proving that my mother was unfit. So I turned up in a boarding school away from my mother. I was actually taken out of the home. I became a ward of the state.
So your dad
He won custody and then he left. In other words, he won custody and then Chrysler moved him to Wilmington, Delaware. and he was alone, so the state wouldn't let him take the children. It was a lot harder in those years. Nowadays, it seems a lot easier when I look at it. That's why I was always drawn to foster care reviews and that, because in those years, it was a lot more difficult. And then you're throwing my mother in a court system and she couldn't speak English.
So how old were you when you went to foster care?
When I went to a boarding school, I was like,
what do you mean boarding school?
Sarah Fisher. It was a boarding school.
It was like,
I was at Sarah Fisher. I was
right.
Had to be 10.
And how long were you there?
I was in the system. I was in the foster system for 4 years.
Were your brothers with you?
No, my brother was only with me the first year.
Did you see them?
Yeah, I got to see him. My mother went every weekend. God bless her. She couldn't drive, but she went there every weekend.
Your mom went to visit you?
Every weekend, and she'd bring food, and there'd be enough food for everybody that sat down at the table. She was very traditional.
What did she bring?
She would bring tacos y tortillas and things like that. She was a very traditional lady. God bless her. But my brothers, my younger brother got to stay home because he wasn't from the same father.
Oh.
Okay, but my other brother Rudy, he went into Sarah Fisher with me.
Oh, okay. So you and Rudy were in Sarah Fisher from ages what?
Well, he was only there a year. I never was allowed to come back home, but he was there a year.
What do you mean you never went back?
Well, I could come home in the summertime, but I couldn't stay there. They would take me back. I had a wonderful social worker. Her name was Helen Menderville, who eventually became head of the juvenile system. She was just the most marvelous human being you ever met. And she decided to adopt my mother. She actually took her under her wing. No, Senora Carvajal, no, you can't cuss out the court system. I mean, my mother, because my mother was very emotional at times. But and Mrs. Menderville, her name was Helen Menderville, and she was just this wonderful human social worker, African American. And used to take us to church, used to take me to church on Sunday with her because she knew my father was Baptist. And she just took that extra turn. In fact, I just called her when I was in New Mexico the other day. She's 92, and she still volunteers with the Balloon Festival. I mean, that kind of, that kind of energy is amazing to me.
She's in New Mexico?
She's in New Mexico. She's in Albuquerque. She moved to Albuquerque. She retired. And her husband was the head of the music department for the Detroit public school system in those years, when there was a school system, as you well know. But yeah, she was just marvelous. And she took care of my mom, so that we wouldn't get lost in the system. Because kids get lost in the system. I mean, and we were fortunate enough to have somebody that really looked out for us. But not everybody has always been that fortunate. So because of that, I took a big interest in foster care.